Now, police brutality and the death of civilians at the hands of law enforcers are making headlines in the US and across the world, in fact, and it's making headlines here in South Africa. Protests have spread across the United States and further afield following the killing of an unarmed black man, George Floyd, by police. Here in South Africa, soldiers were recently cleared of the murder of Collins Khoza. They assaulted him at his home while enforcing lockdown regulations. An internal SANDF investigation clearing them of the killing, despite the post-mortem report stating that Khoza had died of blunt force trauma to the head. Well, to discuss whether or not there's a worldwide policing crisis, we're joined now by Khadija Bawa, a researcher at the Social Justice Coalition. Good evening, Khadija, and thank you very much for your time. You've written a very interesting article from Collins Khoza to George Floyd, policing in crisis in South Africa and the US. You've drawn similarities between the two countries' policing styles. What would you say they are?
So we've seen in the newer wave of democratic states, from the South African police service, for example, to the Indian police service, we've seen that there is a trend of states using police services to just inflict violence and to use the legitimacy of the state in order to repress and suppress certain groups of people. So we've seen that in the United States, and obviously that's gone on for a much longer time in South Africa. But in South Africa, we are a special case, because post-1994, in our new democracy, we really thought that the police service in South Africa will take a radical shift from how the police was used during apartheid, right? And what we see now is that increasingly so, year after year, there are more and more and more cases of the police inflicting violence, abusing their power, and this is in various ways. This is not just in torture and punishment, cruel and unusual forms of punishment. This is also where police officers are involved in cases of domestic violence, where police officers are using their firearms, and where police officers are raping women in South Africa as well.
Yeah, now you say in your article, we see both these institutions holding on to, quote, hyper-masculine and white supremacist ideals. I'm just wondering how that comparison holds when in South Africa the majority of our police force is black. And if we compare the Collins Khoza killing with what happened in the United States, there's two clear differences for me. One is that what happened with George Floyd was captured on camera, so it's quite plain to see the horror that occurred there. But secondly, there was a very clear black-white element, and in the Collins Khoza case, as far as we know, there wasn't any of that. And also, majority of our police force is black in South Africa. So how can you say that South African police are still holding on to white supremacist ideals?
So if we're talking about the identity of the institutions itself, this is very much still the case in South Africa. And a clear example of that, regardless of who the police officers are, we'll see that in protests in South Africa, protests often turn violent because of police inflicting violence and initiating violence against peaceful protesters. So even though we have a black majority police-led force, those ideas around who is policed and how the brutality against who is policed is still evident. And a clear example of this is during the lockdown in South Africa, right? You had people who were breaking regulations, very obviously doing yoga on the beach, surfing on the beach, protesting on the beach, right? And then you look at examples in colored and black neighborhoods in South Africa, and especially in the Western Cape, where people were literally in the yard. Collins Khoza was in his yard. He clearly stated that he wasn't breaking any regulations. So there we see that the institutions of policing, and this is local law enforcement, this is the SAPS, and this is the South African National Defence Force, need to undergo.
So that's what I wanted to ask you, is what needs to change? I mean, it's not just this incident. We're looking at the Marikana massacre, a huge stain, looking at Andries Tatana, what happened to him.
Yes.
What hasn't changed that has to urgently change?
So I think there are a plethora of reasons, but I think one of the most compelling reasons is that I don't think there has been the political will from the ministers of defense more recently, but also the minister of police, to call out these cases from an internal perspective, right? So when we talk about accountability for policing in South Africa, we almost always outsource accountability to IPID, right, which is the Independent Police Investigative Directorate. But that cannot be the case. Because we have so many cases of police brutality in South Africa, there has to be a strong political will, a mandate from the actors within these forces to hold members of these security services accountable. And so for me, that is one of the things that we've been lacking. And if you read the Collins Khoza judgment, you'll see again that that is the case, that the judge in the judgment of this case demanded that the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Police call on and command their members of security services and tell them that punishment and unusual forms of punishment and torture are unacceptable. So this is the one thing that we're definitely lacking. We are lacking the political will from the very high ups to call to order the people that work for them.
Absolutely. Such interesting insights. And your article as well is a fascinating read in Daily Maverick today. Thank you very much, Khadija Bawa from the Social Justice Coalition.